Good morning. I'm going to be reading from Genesis today. First part is 24, 34 through 38. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly, and he has become wealthy. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female servants, and camels and donkeys. My master's wife, Sarah, has borne him a son in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear an oath and said, You must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but go to my father's family and to my own clan and get a wife for my son. Genesis 24, 42 through 49. When I came to the spring today, I said, Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you will, please grant success to the journey on which I have come. See, I am standing beside this spring. If a young woman comes out to draw water, and I say to her, Please let me drink a little water from your jar, and if she says to me, Drink, and I'll draw water for your camels too, let her be the one the Lord has chosen for my master's son. Before I finished praying in my heart, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew water. And I said to her, Please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I'll water your camels too. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. I asked her, Whose daughter are you? She said, The daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahar, from Melchi, born to him. When I put the ring in her nose and the bracelets on her arms, and I bowed down and worshiped the Lord, I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to get the granddaughter of my master's brother for his son. Now, if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so I may know which way to turn. So they called Rebekah and asked her, Will you go with this man? I will go, she said. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, Oh, our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the cities of their enemies. Then Rebekah and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac had come to Beer-lahai-roi, where he was living in Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate, and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, Who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thank you, Joyce. Lost in his love. That's the phrase for me. Lost in his love. Because I'm always lost, so it's good to be lost in love. Friday, 2 days ago, my brother had a heart attack. And due to the miracles of God through modern medicine, he left the hospital yesterday and slept in his own bed with a stent and a balloon that exploded some of the other stuff. And my sister-in-law is not a widow, and we are not grieving. We are celebrating and rejoicing. We're particularly glad. My brother is the oldest of 5. The rest are all girls. And the first 4 of us came within 6 years of each other. So we were pretty tight, pretty close, and very normal. I just want you to know that. I want to thank, by the way, thinking of Angela did this wonderful family setting for us for this series. And particularly, I want to know how normal it is in 80 degrees weathers to have a fire going. So that might be a clue to where we're going. But anyway, Bill was born 1950 and raised as a boy in the 50s and 60s. It was normal for them to be taught to be bullies, to slug their sisters, to taunt and tease them, to not show any tenderness. And my grandfather, Pappy, actually helped him out on that, told him constantly how he had to be a man, all of those kinds of things. And Bill lived it up. And so the thing about him having this heart attack at this time, and when he's like 73, I think, and is that finally in his old age, he's getting some wisdom. And he's actually reflecting on his life. He's looking into the mirror of where he's been, and he realizes he doesn't like being a bully, of which all of us girls have said, well, good job. We've been telling you that for a long time. But he's allowing his sweetness to come out. He's apologized. He's actually pleasant to be along. I've always got along with Bill. It's the other sisters he's aggravated, but that comes from being the middle child of 5. You get lost a lot of times, which means you also get, you slip under the radar of the bullying effect that happens. So we are very grateful to hear Bill's voice. But when I grew up, at least for the first 9 years of my life while we lived in Southern California, I thought we were a very normal family. I mean, everybody I knew kind of looked like us, acted like us. There was 2 sort of extremes that I saw that made me think that they were abnormal. One was I had a friend named Odette, and she had a maid that her family did that even dressed in a maid's uniform. So when we went to her house, that was pretty la-di-da, and I was just fascinated by that. And then my sister had a friend that the first time I ever saw their place was when my mom dropped Carla off for her birthday party, and they were what I would call dirt poor. I didn't know that term then, but it was just like, wow, I didn't know people could live like this or did live like this. So that was the first sort of, in my first 9 years of life, that kind of rocked my idea of what was normal. And then we went and lived overseas, and we saw lots of different kinds of families. But it wasn't until I came out of 15 years of a very dysfunctional marriage in my early 30s that I began to understand that there's no such thing as a normal family, and that all families are dysfunctional. It's just a matter of how they're dysfunctional and what they do about it. So probably these are lessons I've learned that would serve me better in church work than any theology or anything else, because church is, as we say, a church family. And guess what? We're all dysfunctional in it. Yeah. One of the things I realized when my ex-husband died 2 weeks ago on Sunday from brain cancer, and he came from a super dysfunctional family, and he never quite figured out how to live his life in a way that was functional. He didn't like to have any responsibility, didn't want to support his kids, but he loved them. That was his saving grace. He loved them. He was narcissistic, but he loved his children. And one of the things that I am so proud of is that 2 weeks ago, my children gathered, a week before that, around their father, my 3 older ones, and they gave him a send-off that was filled with love and compassion and care. Even in spite of all of the different things that happened through their life and their relationships with him, which have been many different forms. And it convinced me that even when we're lost in love, that love can balance. So what has this got to do with Genesis? Well, when Debbie asked me to preach for 4 weeks, and she said, do you want to do a series? It's like, well, I don't know. I don't do series too well, but I'll do the lectionary, and I'll probably do the Old Testament because you rarely preach from the Old Testament, and that way people will really appreciate the fact that you're preaching from the New Testament, right? And so I said that before I looked at the scriptures, and the scriptures for these 4 weeks are the story of Abraham and Sarah and their son Isaac, and then Jacob and Esau, and all those kids. It's this long story that begins, let's see, it starts in chapter 12 of Genesis and goes to the end of it, chapter 50. Now the Bible, is not a coherent story. The Bible is a collection of stories. Bible means collection, like of books, like bibliography, right? Or in Spanish, bibliothèque means library. So that word means, and what it is really, we say it's the Word of God, but really it's the word of people trying to understand what it means to be the people of God, and an evolving understanding of who God is, right? From many different perspectives. It contradicts itself constantly because they're written from different perspectives, from different cultures, from different times in people's evolvingness of it. And we say that the Word of God continues to speak through our lives. So the story of Abraham and Sarah and their nephew Lot starts in sort of this paradise place in chapter 12 where they're told to go out into the land of Canaan, many, 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 many miles away, and to create this new people and this new life. Hagar, who was Sarah's servant, who became Abraham's concubine, comes up in chapter 16 with the birth of Ishmael. Isaac, their son, is alluded to in chapter 18, Abraham and Sarah's son, and arrives in chapter 21. Rebekah, as we heard today, is in chapter 24. Their children, Esau and Jacob, show up in chapter 25. I'm telling you this as highlights because I'm expecting you to read chapter 12 through 50 over the month of July, because you'll really be excited about it. Rachel and Leah have all these children, and they go from chapter 29 to 30, and then Joseph's story, which is the longest story in the Old Testament about one person, goes from chapter 37 to 50. Now, there are other stories that are briefly put into that, like, did you know Abraham had a second wife after Sarah died? I'm sure that somebody was excited to marry this 100-and-some-year-old man, but they had 6 more sons, and who knows if they had daughters. His wife was named Keturah. They tell about Ishmael's descendants, which is the line for the Muslim faith. They talk about Esau's descendants, and then my favorite story, which is a little racy, so we're not going to talk about it, is Tamar and Judah. You should read it. So this family is in here taking up most of this first book. And it's sort of laid out as the faith of Abraham and the faith of Sarah should be a model for our faith. That here's this family that is, so amazing through many generations, at least 3 or 4 generations, that should be a model for our faith. But if you read it, you're wondering, really? These stories are what we're supposed to follow? Let's look at Abraham and Sarah for their faith. There's some big things that they did that was faithful, like when Abraham had this vision that God told him to leave this paradise and go off to Canaan, which looked kind of more like, the comparison between eastern Washington flora, or western Washington flora and eastern Washington flora. You know, I mean, it's a little drier, a little less fertile. And so they moved. He stayed faithful to God in worshiping him, even though there were many different gods going on into Canaan. He trusted God, sort of. He had to be reminded over and over again that God would make him the father of many descendants. And, you know, the great faith one I thought was he cast out Ishmael, his son, and Hagar by God's orders, and he tried to sacrifice Isaac. Now, there's a shadow side, like he cast out his son Ishmael, and he tried to sacrifice Isaac. That's a bit of a shadow side. You know, there's, as a migrant, this is kind of one of my favorite ones that you may not be aware of. As a migrant coming through this land of many different kinds of rulers and lords, apparently Sarah was quite beautiful in her day, and when he would come into this new land, he would say to her, just tell them you're my sister, because if you're so beautiful that as my wife, they would kill me, and then they would take you, so they can just take you as my sister. He did that 3 different times. Now, he wasn't lying. I don't know if you know that Sarah was actually his half-sister, same father, two different mothers. So again, we're beginning to wonder about the normalcy of this family, but that's what they did back then. He disinherits all of his sons. He had those 6 other sons, plus Ishmael, and sends them to the east, it says, so that Isaac will have everything. And then there's this messy triangle where, you know, when there's a family and the parents are pretty messy and everything else, who suffers? Children, right? So these founding matriarch and patriarch, Sarah is like giving up on God's promise that she is going to have many children, which, you know, being in your 90s, that might be a reason to give up, but she's given up, and so she says to her young maid, Hagar, go into Abraham's tent, get pregnant, and have a baby, and then I'll raise that as my son, or my daughter, whichever it turned out. And so Hagar does that, because she's a slave, she needs to do that, and then she gets all preening proud, because she's pregnant and Sarah's not. She's beautiful, Sarah's old, you know, all those things. So she kind of lords it over Sarah, who then decides that the woman needs to be cast out and talks to Abraham about it. And Abraham's going, it's not my problem. I mean, I'm just doing what you wanted me to do, you know. I mean, I'm not going to take responsibility for any of this mess, you know. So, I mean, you don't have anybody in your families that does that, right? So, you know, it's as Debbie says, I like her term, it's a hot mess. So why are these stories told to us? Well, the glory of the Bible is that they are told to us in all their messiness. They're transparent. How many hero stories have you heard or seen on TV where they tell you how screwed up the kid is who becomes Superman or Batman or Spider-Man? I don't watch the Marvel things, so I don't know all of them. They don't tell you that their family was a mess. They hide all that. How many of you have skeletons in your closet of your family? You know, my mom was a child of the 20s and the 30s, and she was the queen of keeping taps, keeping it down, keeping it covered, anything that was wrong in our family. Because we were a normal family. There's nothing wrong with us. We lived in Southern California, and my grandfather and grandmother, my dad's parents, Nana and Pappy, moved to be right next door to us, which was down the hill and up, but they were our closest neighbors. And apparently, wherever my parents had moved, once they started having children, Nana and Pappy moved next to them. And Pappy, my brother, was the joy of his life, and he would take Bill around and tell him how to be a man. And then suddenly, when I was 9 years old, in 1962, we moved to Nigeria. So it was, like I said, many years later when I was coming through this marriage that I realized that although I thought at that time that my then husband was a major jerk, I kind of had to admit that I had something to do with the falling apart. And so I went to counseling. And when I met John, I really dug into counseling because it was like, how do I know if I can pick a good one? And you all who know John know that that would be a question that would remain that way for quite some time. It's not like he tells you how good he is. I mean, luckily we wrote letters, so I found out more from him than not because, I married him for stability. I figured he married me for interest, but for some reason he calls it chaos. I don't get that. But what I found out in that counseling, I went in and I said, how did I screw this up? And I had a very wise counselor who led me through family dynamics and led me through dysfunctions in family dynamics and the roles we play and what choices we have in terms of learning how to claim them and change them. Dysfunction happens because at one time that behavior, whether in our own lives or in the lives of our ancestors, was functional. But over time, it no longer works, but we keep on doing it, and we pass it on to our children. And my job as a mother and as a human being, and eventually as a pastor and as a wife, all of those, was to claim my dysfunction, to name it, and to learn to change. My mother, as I said, who kept quiet on everything, was pretty upset with me because I would tell my children about the dysfunctions that ran in our family. I mean, first of all, I would tell her that depression is deep and addiction. We have that addictive gene. And she would say, who never was depressed in her life, and, well, she was after she got older, but at this point she had not been depressed, and who did not have that addictive gene, would say, that's just an excuse for being depressed or addicted. And I said, oh yeah, Mom, people need excuses like that to do it. Oh, I think I want to be addicted to something. I think it runs in my family, so it's okay. Later, she sort of saw that that wasn't true, but that's my father was deeply depressed and had a very addictive nature. And as a veterinarian, he could prescribe himself medications. And so we never knew if he was bipolar, which I suspect he was, undiagnosed, or if he just had uppers and downers. But he was an amazing man. He was a veterinarian. He tried to save the world. He did all over the places he did. He loved us deeply, but he was very conflicted, very pained in his life. And in 1984, he committed suicide because he could see that his mind was leaving him and that he was breaking up and he was making hell for everybody else in his life that he loved, but he was so unable to love when he was in the midst of some of his behavior. As I spent time doing reflection afterwards on my own life, one of the things that I realized was that incest must have run through our lives. I could see it in family dynamics. And I talked to my younger sister who said, you're crazy, you're always looking for the dark things. You think that you bring every skeleton out, it'll be okay, and there's probably not even a skeleton in there, and you're ridiculous. So later I tried my older sister who said, oh yeah, I remember Pappy fondling me before we left overseas. She told me later she had not thought of that forever, but it just popped out as soon as I saw it. And we realized when I told my mother finally, who I thought would not do it, because she told me, she says, I don't understand all this sexual misconduct and incest and everything else, because it never happened in my day. And it's like, well, Mama, let me tell you. And so I told her that I thought that Pappy was incestuous with his two daughters, my dad's older sisters, and was starting in on us. And that Dad, who was helpless to help his older sisters, or his mother, who was beaten and emotionally destroyed, that Dad, no matter where he moved, Pappy followed. And so he left the country. And that's why we went to Africa. And I expected my mother to say, oh, no, you don't know what you're talking about. And she just went silent. And she said, that's why we left. I never knew it. I always wondered, why did we just get up and leave halfway across the world in the 1960s when, weren't there? And it was the only way Dad knew how to protect us. This normal family of mine, where we do love each other, is normal. That's the thing. This kind of stuff runs in all sorts of families. And if we don't name it, claim it, and change it, then we are captives to it. And part of the joy of stories like this that are in the scriptures is that they keep bringing us back to screwed up people like us, and says, God still uses you for the healing of the world. God still loves you. You are a mess, but you don't have to stay that way. The world's a mess, but it doesn't have to stay that way. The church is a mess, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Because we read in the scriptures over and over again from many different people's perspectives that there's nothing that God cannot heal and make whole, according to God's vision and love, not according to ours. That God's vision is that each of us is a unique and beloved child of God, created to love, created to heal, created to be made whole. I have to say that I brag about this congregation. You do a good job, as dysfunctional as you all are, of loving each of us where we are. You raise up children to know that they're beloved. You welcome in people to say you are a child of God. We may not understand you, but we're going to learn to love you and understand you. And I pray that this continues and grows. And that we as a congregation will name our dysfunctions, speak about them, talk about them, claim them, and learn to change them through the grace and the power of God. Amen.